What if I told you that Peter Thiel, the former CEO of PayPal and the first investor in companies like Facebook and Stripe, had a worldview that was influenced not only by Silicon Valley's libertarian ideals, but by Christian ones too, and especially the teachings of Jesus Christ? In this video series, I'll be exploring how Christianity has influenced the worldview of one of the world's most famous investors, and I'll break down the 3 pillars of Thiel's investing framework and show how they're inspired by Christianity. To begin, let's rewind the clock to Stanford in the 1980s, when Thiel was an undergraduate student, which will bring us to the first theme of Thiel's worldview: avoid competition. At Stanford, Peter Thiel studied under a French historian and literary critic named René Girard, who is famous for an idea called Memetic Theory. Memetic Theory now forms the bedrock of Thiel's worldview, and Thiel's connection with René Girard stretched beyond the walls of Stanford classrooms and into a meaningful lifelong friendship. And when Girard died, Thiel even spoke at his memorial service. Girard's Memetic Theory shows how humans are imitative. This starts as early as our childhood acquisition of language, and later it shows up in the kinds of restaurants we go to. Have you ever noticed how we automatically assume that restaurants with lines are the best ones? Girard saw the world as a theater of envy, where, like mimes, we imitate each other's desires. The problem with imitation is that it leads to violence. Consider the famous opening words of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet: "Two houses, both alike in dignity." Through bloody battles between the Montagues and the Capulets, Shakespeare reminds us that people fight not because they're so different, but because they're so alike. And Shakespeare wasn't the only writer to identify the vicious mimetic impulse within us. Sigmund Freud called the tendency for conflict between two similar people the narcissism of small differences. He showed how we reserve tooth-grinding envy for people most like ourselves. The roots of Memetic Theory reach back to the Bible and the story of the 2 brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain is a farmer and the older brother to Abel, who is a shepherd. At the beginning, they love each other and have a shared mimetic desire for approval from their father Adam. Initially, Cain admires Abel, but when Cain turns envious of his younger and more successful brother, he kills him. And in tune with the Cain and Abel story, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote that if any 2 men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies, and in the way to their end, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another.
This is war.
Now, I'll be honest, when I first read about Memetic Theory, I was skeptical. Girard's ideas seemed trivial because I didn't really realize how significant they were. And then I started seeing empirical evidence of his ideas everywhere, like in the way people desire $12 avocado toast and the new iPhone and even TikTok fame. Or the time I saw a line that stretched for 15 New York City blocks on a Sunday morning, filled with people waiting to buy merchandise from a Logan Paul pop-up shop. And by the way, if you're enjoying this breakdown of the human psyche, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this. In the coming months, I'll be sharing more social and philosophical commentary, covering thinkers like Peter Thiel, concepts like Memetic Theory, and lots of business strategy, which I'll get to later in this video. So subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, when it comes to Memetic Theory, I had the same revelation that Peter Thiel had as a student in Girard's class at Stanford. Girard observed that when you put kids together in a room full of toys, they'll inevitably desire the same toy, and a rivalry will emerge between them. Human see, human want. But children aren't the only people influenced by mimetic competition. You and I, we're not above it. The problems of mimesis are just as real among adults. Prestige-oriented environments create nasty feuds, often over little prizes. Now, a family friend named Julia tells a head-spinning story about her time at Columbia University in New York, one of the most competitive places in the world. She couldn't leave her books in the library because when she did, competing students often stole them. And rather than absorbing the course material and preparing themselves for a life after college, she said that students sabotaged their peers and shared false study guides. Relationships were shattered by sour resentment, and classmates couldn't be trusted as friends turned into enemies. Academic rivalries are vicious because they focus on hierarchies over knowledge. People bicker over trivial details and compete for a limited set of status-based titles. In each class, there could only be one valedictorian. In each department, one chairman. In each university, one president. And speaking about the faculty relationships at Harvard, Henry Kissinger, the great American statesman, once said, "The battles were so ferocious because the stakes were so small. The faculty lost sight of the big picture and fought over the small scraps of superficial status gains. And the more they strived to be different, the more their actions ended up mirroring each other." Thiel speaks with a near religious reverence for Memetic Theory. He once said that Girard's ideas are a portal onto the past, onto human origins and our history. It's a portal onto the present and onto the interpersonal dynamics of psychology. It's a portal onto the future in terms of where we're going to let these mimetic desires run amok and head towards apocalyptic violence. People are copying machines, and Christianity is the only religion that sees humans as the Son of God. And in tune with both our human nature and mimetic theory, Christians are taught to copy Jesus and look up to him instead of clawing and fighting with each other like crabs in a bucket. And that's why the first commandment says that we should look up only to God. Look up, not around, it says. And then the last commandment is also an instruction to avoid competition. And true to mimetic theory, the last commandment focuses on the neighbor instead of the object of desire, because all objects are desirable when they belong to your neighbor. So these commandments, number 1 and number 10, the first one and the last one, they're simple, but we need to be reminded of them because they are so easy to forget. Just look at how talented people follow the same narrow tracks in life. Thiel wasn't above it either. Early in his career, he fell into the mimetic trap when he worked as an associate for a New York law firm where the hours were long and the competition cutthroat. All the lawyers competed for the same shared goals, with the holy grail being a Supreme Court clerkship. They ranked themselves not by their absolute progress toward a transcendent end goal, but by progress within their peer group, which reminds me of my friend's story from Colombia and also of the Cain and Abel story. And from that experience, Thiel developed a motto that still serves him today. Competition is for losers. From that experience, Thiel learned that competition distracts us from things that are more important, meaningful, or valuable. That's why we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And inside the law firm, lawyers were trapped in a never-ending rat race where they climbed the corporate ladder by winning favor with partners at the top, while others engaged in small acts of sabotage against their coworkers. Today, Thiel worries that without a positive-sum vision for the future, young Americans are stuck playing vicious zero-sum status games. Top colleges have become vocational schools for investment banking and management consulting. That's what I saw in my university experience too. And in 2007, for example, half of Harvard seniors took jobs in finance or consulting. Too many Ivy League graduates know how to follow rules and get things done, but they never stop to ask if things are actually worth doing in the first place. Thiel says there's something very odd about a society where the most talented people get all tracked towards the same elite colleges, where they end up studying the same small number of subjects and go into the same small number of careers. It's very limiting for our society as well for those students. And in those words, you could hear the echoes of the last book in the New Testament, Revelations 21, which calls upon Christians to create a new heaven and a new earth. According to this vision, humanity will be cleansed, renewed, and perfected. The horrors of the world will be undone, all the evils will be repaired, and the pain of existence will vanish like evaporating water after a thunderstorm. And better yet, the joy and glory of a world after redemption will be greater because humans have suffered to reach it. Bringing this Christian vision to life and saving the world from apocalypse is Thiel's central project. He wants us to work for the fruits of eternity, to avoid mimetic competition, instead of chasing the fleeting pleasures of the day. Instead of focusing on meaningless scandals and endless political dramas, he wants us to focus on preventing runaway mimetic violence. That way, when the day of judgment comes, we'll lean towards the side of the good. So what can we actually do with this theory that directly impacts our lives? Although Thiel doesn't explicitly state this outright, I see a prescription in his work that will prevent competition, and it's copy the people who don't copy people. Let me explain. The internet makes this uniquely possible because on social media platforms, you can curate your intellectual environment, which allows you to be hyper-mimetic towards the people who are anti-mimetic. That means that you can copy the people who don't copy people. They're the rare breed of people who think outside of the box. Often, these people aren't well socialized. They're geeks, losers, weirdos. But once you find them, Thiel says that you shouldn't ignore them like most people. Instead, you should collaborate with them. That way, you can work with them on problems that nobody else is working on, and you should especially do it if you're uniquely capable of solving those problems. Thiel says that we should ask the questions we're not supposed to ask, so we can find the answers we're not supposed to find. And this philosophy has turned Peter Thiel into one of the world's best talent identifiers. He knows that the world's most original ideas come from outside the spotlight. So when he meets somebody new and is thinking about investing in them, he considers how interesting they are instead of how well credentialed they are. Thiel makes his solution explicit in the 3rd chapter of his book, 0 to 1, which is called All Happy Companies Are Different. The book applies Girard's ideas to business, and in tune with Memetic Theory, Thiel says that companies should avoid competition and walk the path of differentiation. He explains that many businesses create a lot of value, but they don't capture that value because the industry that they're in is just too crowded, and as a result, even the very big businesses like airlines can be unprofitable. According to Thiel, monopoly is the ideal end state of every successful business. And if you want to create and capture economic value, don't compete, he says. The more unique companies are, the more the business world can flourish. In 0 to 1, Thiel writes, once you have many people doing something, you have lots of competition and little differentiation. You generally never want to be part of a popular trend. So I think trends are often things to avoid. And what I prefer is a sense of mission, that you are working on a unique problem that people are not solving elsewhere. When it comes to monopolies, Thiel shows how Google is basically a monopoly by comparing it to the airline industry. The top 7 airlines in the world are collectively worth about $50 billion. But Google, one company, is worth more than $1 trillion. And that's because the airlines compete with each other while Google stands alone. And if we're being honest here, if Google is a monopoly, then Facebook probably is too. But Thiel would never say that because he's on the board of the company and was one of the first investors. Avoiding competition is ancient wisdom. In the Gospel of Matthew, section 13, verse 7, it says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." It turns out that Thiel's Christianity-inspired worldview lines up with Michael Porter's philosophy of business strategy. Porter is a Harvard Business School professor who believed that strong businesses aim to be unique, not necessarily the best, and trying to outcompete rivals leads to mediocre performance. In summary, the first principle of Thiel's worldview is avoid competition. But that's hard because of humans' memetic natures. Basically, everybody copies. We all do it. And Thiel's copying instinct led him to a New York City law firm, which he left after 7 months and 3 days. Thiel's fix was basically to surround himself with geeks, losers, and weirdos who don't copy people. And it's a fix that, ironically, you should copy. Find the rare breed of person with a radical vision for the future and a one-of-a-kind worldview. Then look up to ambitious people working on ambitious projects instead of just looking at your peers and copying what they're doing. All of these ideas go back to what Thiel learned from René Girard at Stanford. And Girard himself picked up a lot of these ideas from famous stories such as the Cain and Abel story at the beginning of the Old Testament. And in future videos, I'll be talking about the next 2 pillars of Thiel's worldview. Tell the best story, and don't worry about the productivity of your curiosity. And once they go live, they'll be clickable here and here.